Happy Friday, happy October, happy fall, y'all. Hey, coming to you from my breakfast table this Friday morning. As I can feel a little bit of crispiness, that little bit of treble that's in the air, even on a hot day. That fall's coming. That's where we are in Texas, anyway. Anyway, I hope y'all are doing well out there. Here's what we got this week. Outskirts of town. So look, I write a lot about my travels in green lights and other, even in poems and prayers. And people ask me a lot of questions about, the approach I take when I'm traveling. Do I always buy a one-way ticket? No, not now that I have kids. How long do I plan my journeys? How do I pick a spot to stay? How do I stay long enough to give the place the justice it deserves? Well, look, when I go to a new place, right, and if I like it, I find myself wanting to go, hey man, I think I might want to move there. Get a spot right there where I had a good time. Main Street, Bourbon Street, 6th Street, Sunset Boulevard, Soho, whatever it may be. But I stay there long enough, and then I soon realize, well, you know what? No, I don't actually want to live on Tourist Attraction Avenue. I'd rather live on the outskirts, a little further from the main drag and draw. Now, Austin, Texas used to be on the outskirts of town, on the outskirts of Dallas, the outskirts of Hollywood, but now it's a metropolitan city, and I still live here, though, because to me it still feels like a village. Anyway, this poem I want to read you is in my new book, Poems and Prayers, and I want to share it to you, see if it tickles your fancy. On the outskirts of town. On the outskirts of approval, a little closer to I don't need it, where my backyard has a lawn and it's up to me to deed it. On the outskirts of permission, next door to nobody minds, down the road from conditions and your word ties the bind. On the outskirts of a brewery, a little closer to cold beer, where if someone gives a listen, well, you give a chance to hear. Where there's no hurry up to get there and you don't have to wait in line, on the cul-de-sac of an apology, making things just fine. On the outskirts of clever snark, too busy looking down to find it, where an upright soul can swagger, with a lot of care to mind it. On the outskirts of ambition and racing in the rat, in between the great divide of I'll do this if you do that. On the outskirts of more money as a pass to having class, where all you gotta be is you as long as you're not an ass. On the outskirts of the dorks, a little closer to the nerds, where the traffic isn't jamming and the road's got room for swerves. On the outskirts of crime, a little closer to misdemeanor, up the road from arrested, where the sheets are a little cleaner. On the outskirts of pride, a little closer to your honor, cat-a-corner to a good fight, further from your goner. On the outskirts of socialites that never earned a callus, cozy in a cabin that sleeps more like a palace. On the outskirts of illusion, with solid walls for me to lean, down the road from America, a little closer to the dream. On the outskirts of trendy, a little closer to classic, down the street from surgery, a little further from plastic. On the outskirts of honking horns, a little closer to right away, around the bend from stealing to win, where work still makes your hay. On the outskirts of memberships, a little closer to general admission, with fewer motors on the water, 'cause the lake's still good for fishing. On the outskirts of litigation, a little closer to common sense, up the road from trespassing, where you don't need a fence. On the outskirts of flamboyance, a little closer to need, off the cocaine highway on the dirty road to weed. On the outskirts of rules, a little closer to choice, where you don't have to yell for me to hear your voice. On the outskirts of 9 to 5, a little closer to when you do, where you're looking out for me and I keep an eye on you. On the outskirts of edgy, but still on the banks, where manners are a currency in the free trade of thanks. On the outskirts of revenge, a little closer to grace, where there's rhyme on the road to reason for the race. On the outskirts of exhausted, a little closer to tired, where being good at what you do keeps you from being fired. On the outskirts of most popular, a little closer to cool, where come one comes all and doesn't suffer a fool. On the outskirts of re-recorded, a little closer to live, a few more miles from the studio, a few doors down from the dive. On the outskirts of proof, a little closer to believe, where immaculate conception's more easily conceived. On the outskirts of cynics, but still a little skeptic, where there's still moss on the stone, minus the septic. On the outskirts of long shadows, but closer to the shade, a zip code away from the mall where retail's local made. On the outskirts of lying, a little closer to BS, snuggled up near nervous, but still further from stress. On the outskirts of disease, a little closer to sin, where getting where you're going depends on where you've been. Yeah, the outskirts of town. You know what I'm talking about? See you next week.